Welcome to Mishna study, Masechet Maasrot, Perek Bet Mishna Zayin. Well, here we're going to continue the conversation where a transaction could actually be kovea for Maaser, right? If there's any type of, we said, a business transaction, a purchase, right? That constitutes something that now becomes obligated in Maasrot, and we'll see how this plays out in our Mishnah. Now, it's important to know, just as an introduction, that someone that's hired, an employee that's hired to work a field, the Torah prescribes him that he could eat whatever he wants to eat, right? That's it. He can eat from that field. The pasuk is kitavo bekerem re'ayecha ve'achalta anavim kinafshecha sovecha ve'el kelicha lo titen. Right, so we have a tradition that is talking about an employee, not anyone that's just walking through their friend's vineyard. An employee that's hired to work in their friend's vineyard, so the employer needs to allow the employee to eat whatever he wants when he's working. Right, so that's what the Torah already it gives the employee. Now our Mishnah is going to focus on the other laws that stem from this. Someone who hires an employee to work with him to dehydrate figs, right? What they would do is they would set them out, they would lay them out on like a rooftop, and they would dry out those figs, and it would preserve for the winter season. And Amarlo, he tells him, says the employee says, I'm going to do so. I'll help you work with this, but on condition that I can eat figs as I'm helping you. So patur. The employee is allowed to eat, and he's patur from setting maasrot. This is not considered a business transaction, even though the employee says on condition that I could eat while I'm working. Right? The Torah already conditioned that. So what the employee is saying means nothing. So therefore, it's not considered a business transaction, and he's allowed to eat an achilat aray as anyone else would, and he's patur from giving maasrot. But let's say he says, ani ubni, on condition that me and my son can eat, or he says, beni misechari, right? Or he says, on condition that my son will eat from my from my wages. So over here, other people, right? Right. So in lieu of me receiving my wage, let my son eat. So okay. So this, what does this mean? He's allowed to eat and he's patur. But his son that eats is hayav for giving maasrot. Why? Because this was already considered a purchase. Right? This was a business transaction, and therefore, if there's a business transaction, that already obligates maasrot. Now Mishnah continues, on condition that I can eat at the time of the kitzi'ah, right? The time of the kitzi'ah is the time of the, as we mentioned in the beginning, the time where they're, laying it out to dry, they're dehydrating these figs. At this time, or even afterwards. Okay, so we know that the law is that you're allowed to eat from the Torah someone that's working with something that's connected to the ground, something that's mechobal karka. You're allowed to eat that, at all the way up until b'shat gemar melacha, even when you're working in its final processing stage. Let's say it's something that's already detached from the ground, then you're allowed to eat from it ad shelo nigmera melachto, up until, right, the final processing stage. Now the kitzi'ah is, some of that is that final processing stage. So when it comes to the dehydration process, okay, so you're allowed to eat up until that time. But afterwards, right, the Torah doesn't grant those figs to the employee. That's not something that he's allowed to just eat from. So therefore, this is already considered a business transaction after, right? After he's dehydrating the figs. And therefore, once he eats afterwards, he's ochel v'hayav, if he eats, he's hayav, he's obligated to separate maasrot. So why is that so? Because he's not eating from what the law that the Torah prescribed. This is the rule. Right? Anyone that eats based off the condition the Torah set, right? That the pasuk that we mentioned, right, from Sefer Devarim. So he's patur. He's patur from separating the maasrot because there's no transaction, right? The agreement really means nothing. Right, the agreement between the two, with the employee and the employer. But someone that's not eating from din Torah, rather he's relying on the condition that he is set with his employer, hayav. Then in that case, he's going to be hayav to separate Maasrot before he eats.